Welcome! Today we are opening the dusty pages of time again. In the silence of the night, we are going on a soft journey through history. This time, our topic is the understanding of beauty in the Middle Ages. What were people doing to be beautiful at that time? How far to go for the sake of beauty they could go? You will be surprised. But before you start, if this channel gives you peace, if it helps you sleep, or if it just satisfies your curiosity, please take a look at the thank you button at the bottom of the video. This little support is a great motivation for us if you are ready. Now, take a deep breath. Close your eyes and let's start walking in the mirror of the past together. While the morning sun was reflected on the pale surface of the stone-paved courtyard, Genova was standing upright in front of her mother. She was only 13 years old, but one day she could be the wife of the count. She was supposed to attend the first whitening ceremony today. The servants applied an even paler powder to her pale skin. A vein blue paint, not a rose-colored paint, was pressed on her cheeks. Finally, she was asked to open her mouth. When Genevieve she reluctantly spread her lips. A woman, why? He got angry. He spread a dark mixture on his teeth with the stick in his hand. He knew he didn't need to look in the mirror. His teeth were supposed to be pitch black because his mother said that a white-skinned, black-toothed girl smells like wealth. But Genevieve is beautiful in her own reflection. It saw fear, not the fear. In medieval and Renaissance Europe, beauty was quite different from today's aesthetic understanding. Today, healthy white teeth and natural appearance are considered the symbol of beauty. At that time, these ideas were reversed because beauty was not only a physical image but also a class indicator, a cultural symbol, even a way of life blended with faith. White skin was the indispensable condition of beauty, but this was not a whiteness provided by nature, not to go out with nobility. It meant pallor that came with a life away from sunlight. While the villagers working in the field were tanning. The nobles used to use lead-based powders to whiten their skin even more. These powders can lead to rashes, wounds on the skin over time. Even if it gave way to loom, the cruel rules of fashion would never change. Another aesthetic standard that attracted attention next to white skin was black teeth. Especially in the 14th and 15th centuries, sugar is still an expensive and rare product. While the teeth of those who frequently consume sugar rot and it would darken. This decayed image was considered an indicator of wealth. So someone with black teeth was rich enough to eat a lot of sweets, while the poor draws attention with his white and healthy teeth. But this situation was considered a sign of class. Some nobles' teeth. They used substances such as soot pitch or wine sediment to blacken the men in natural ways. Sometimes this habit becomes symbolic, similar to ohagoro rituals in Japan. Traditional beauty, when women darken their teeth before marriage. However, this aesthetic understanding was not limited to physical appearance. White-skinned, black-toothed women were thought to be sensitive, elegant, and elite. These definitions from working life. Sun to field and therefore bottom dotted was forming an artificial border that separated if the beauty was not natural. It was a privilege that was purchased and should be protected. What was interesting was that this understanding was more flexible in men. The standards regarding the skin color of men were less strict, but they were also the statuses. They put powders on their bodies to show them they wore gloves on their hands. They tried to hide the traces of sweat and naturalness by using excessive perfume because the bad smell was the smell of the lower class. This whole look was not only about his physical brain, but also to God. The respect for it was an expression of loyalty to the class structure of society and compliance with the social hierarchy. So while a young girl was becoming beautiful, she actually represented not only herself, but also the class she belonged to. Unfortunately, these expectations are a big bar on women. It was forming a ski. The body was turning into a battlefield. Lead powders, chemicals used to poison blood circulation, reduce fertility, causing skin infections. But all this bitterness was considered the price of a noble beauty over time. Sugar has become cheaper. Everyone can reach it. Not only the rich, but also the poor whose teeth have darkened. This situation has brought an end to the black teeth fashion. The aesthetic understanding has changed in the 17th century. Whitening teeth has become a separation. It was sparkling, but now the teeth had to be sparkling in the same way. This transformation was with the change of economic access, not the class structure in society. But when we look at it today, the understanding of beauty of the past may seem foreign or even funny to us. But at that time, when the girl looked in the mirror, she was living according to what others would see, not what she saw on her own face. White, black teeth. These are not just physical details. They were a symbol of status, belonging, faith, and obedience. The weather carried the coolness of April, but the house the young girl in China was looking at the mirror in sweat. In the reflection on the mirror, the newly glued Okud tape on her forehead was drawing attention. Her mother shook her head with satisfaction. "Now you have fucked a lady," said the girl, realized that her forehead looked even more open. But Bishi couldn't predict whether the flower was beautiful or ugly. While the birds were chirping outside, a little girl inside was learning the definition of beauty again. The Renaissance and in the following centuries, especially in Western Europe, beauty for women is only an innate feature. It was almost a task that needed to be worked on. And one of the most iconic and surprising beauty applications of this period was the forehead expansion. The beauty of the forehead was the most important elegance criterion of a period. Women with high foreheads, wide and smooth, and it was associated with nobility. For this reason, the hair was shaved. In some cases, it was cut off the root, or the front part of the head was deliberately forced to fall out. Women sometimes use sharp razor blades, sometimes special lotions with a mixture of vinegar for this procedure. These methods were painful, irritating, but beauty had a price, and this price was paid quietly. Every time women looked in the mirror, they would see the expectations of society, not their own faces. An artist would be paired with a face with a high moment and an intellectual mind. Even they reflected this understanding in their paintings. Look, the birth of Botticelli's Venus or the women in Leonardo da Vinci's labeled Ferronier paintings, all of their foreheads are unusually wide. This was not a coincidence. It was a fashion, and this fashion is physical dot. It left psychological marks, as well as opening the forehead was not only aesthetic, but also an indicator of obedience and harmony with the social order. Women used to do this practice not only to be beautiful, but also to show the class they belonged to. This is me. It was a silent way to say, I am as you want. Anyway, the woman's voice didn't come out loud at that time, but her forehead should have been high. But the hair was a symbol associated with femininity in most cultures, whereas here is a few centimeters on the forehead of the woman's hair. It was almost a shame. Especially young girls who grew up around the palace or in noble families started to open their foreheads as soon as they entered adolescence. This was a kind of transition ritual, like the silent celebration of the transition from childhood to femininity. This practice would not be limited to physical appearance. Women would give a piece of themselves while opening their foreheads, sometimes from their freedom, sometimes from their personalities, and most of the time this sacrifice was not noticed at all, neither in the books of the past nor men. This beauty effort did not find a place in the history pages written by, but there were always marks on women's faces, eyes, silence over time. This fashion changed when a new queen came or a painter was looking for a different aesthetic. It was covered with hair, but even if these temporary fashions changed, the social pressures suffered by women remained in place because the issue was not only hair, but also belonging to belong. It was to be allegiant. When we look back today, it is very much behind this understanding of beauty that seems strange to us. Oh, there is a deep story. Women giving up their bodies for the sake of beauty, living according to the invisible rules of society and accepting all this without questioning. This was the real truth behind the foreheads. Maybe the little girl looking in the mirror that day as Jan Lieska was opening not only his forehead but also his future, without realizing it, his hair was disappearing a little more with every centimeter of falling out. If this narrative affected you, to subscribe to our channel to trace the pain that was not visible but felt throughout history together and Downton. Forget to support with the thank you button because history is sometimes hidden in a tuft of hair. Now, let's continue. The small mirror was shaking in her hands. The morning light in front of the window was falling right on her face. The young woman looked at the tweezers she was holding in her hand one last time. Her mother's S's wife ringled in my ear. An elegant woman did not carry an eyebrow. Then she took a deep breath and started to pluck it one by one. She was hurting herself, not her eyebrows. But she couldn't tell anyone because this was the silent burden of beauty. The Middle Ages from the end of the Renaissance to the Victorian period, the female body in Europe was shaped according to the norms drawn by society. The aesthetic understanding of these periods determined not only the fashion, but also the place of women in society, their position, and even their silence. One of the most striking applications was that women completely plucked their eyebrows. Today, a modern woman's beauty routine is based on highlighting, thickening, or shaping the eyebrows, while the ideal understanding of beauty in the past centuries was the opposite. Forehead without eyebrows was almost the golden rule for a docile and unobtrusive face. Eyebrows were seen as a symbol of expression, resistance, and character. So the fact that a woman has no eyebrows makes her perceived as more docile, more feminine, and more obedient. This practice, especially for women belonging to the noble class, this practice pointed to not only beauty but also status, nobility, and proper upbringing. An eyebrowless face also showed that the woman could devote time and money to financial care because this process is time. It required physical care. It is reapplied at least a few times a week. Sometimes it was tried to prevent the roots from coming out with vinegar or herbal mixtures. But this practice left not only physical but also psychological scars. Staying eyebrows was a reaction of the woman in a sense. The trace caused it to carry a face that was expressionless and did not show his feelings. This was what it was wanted anyway. A woman who did not show emotion, who existed only to be looked at, is like a painting, but a painting that does not speak and does not resist. Artists and painters reflect this aesthetic understanding. They did not hesitate to do it. Looking at the Renaissance paintings, the portraits of women with eyebrows, without eyebrows, or almost invisible eyebrows attract attention because this was not only the expression of a fashion, but also an expression of mentality. As the woman's expression was erased, his voice would also decrease, and when the woman was silent, society was considered more peaceful. So what would women feel? Some of them accepted this process. Mothers would teach this tradition to their daughters. They would say that the first step is through their eyebrows for her to be an elegant woman. But from the inside, some would feel pain every way. The moment was to make the feather a little less than itself. Looking at each mirror was to see again the pattern that society had engraved them. Moreover, this was not only unique to nobles. Over time, middle-class women began to imitate this fashion because beauty did not only come from the truth, he would have wanted it, and the price of being as society wanted would sometimes start with tweezers and continued with a silence that lasted for years. But by the disappearance of this practice over time, not by changing the understanding of beauty, but by women gradually protecting their own expressions, it was Mka'an, the eyebrows came back, the expressions appeared, women started to talk, but those silent, expressionless faces that once existed in the dusty pages of history tell us not how women had to look at that time, but how they should not look today. A few touches made with an eyebrow pencil could have been the symbol of a resistance in the past, because beauty is sometimes a weapon, sometimes a chain, sometimes a silence tool. And in this story, eyebrows are not just hair. They express resistance. And in Invisiblets, the trace of the struggle, a young woman was standing in front of the closed window. She had a silk corset in her hand. Her mother was preparing to dress her. "I can't breathe," she said. Her mother smiled in a whisper, an elegant woman, breathless. She squeezed the corset a little. The young girl's ribs were buried inside, but her mother was pleased. Belle was now in one hand. It's hard to tell what the women of the Victorian era sacrificed for the sake of looking elegant, because this sacrifice is not only physical, but also a social and psychological ZI. If it's like a fig, if it's the metal link of that chain, of course, instead of comfortable, stretchy fabrics that come to mind when it comes to underwear today. The first thing women of that period wear as soon as they wake up in the morning is a body reinforced with steel bales made of thick fabrics. They were corsets that squeezed like a statue. But this statue was alive and more crushed with every breath. The purpose of the corsets was not just to thin the waist, to erect the chest, to push the shoulders back, to keep the woman's stance in a decent framework, and most importantly, the ideal woman, Dot. It was to force it into shape. This ideal was not even realistic most of the time. It caused health problems ranging from the displacement of the thin lumbar organs to the compression of the lung, the breaking of the ribs. Even the doctors of the period were helpless about this. Ink Girl is condemned to these tight corsets before her bones are fully developed, and this situation would have prevented them from growing. The ribs would sometimes be permanently deformed, But the only reaction of society to this physical damage was how elegant you look. This is actually elegant was a kind of invisible bondage. Women were alienated from their own body. They suffered while sitting. They were afraid to breathe deeply. The circulatory system slows down. Pressure is applied to the stomach. Fainting became common. So, in Victorian literature and there are so many women who faint in their blouses. Sometimes out of emotion, sometimes out of stuffs, but the reason for all of them is the same corset, and these corsets are not only worn by women, but a girl was also considered a symbol of how well a woman was raised when she was first introduced to the corset by Nessie. She was no longer considered a child because being a woman meant getting used to the pain. It was to learn to be bored and endure with a smile. Moreover, this pressure was felt not only physically, but also socially. Religion could be branded as a loose, indecent, or a bad example to her. The woman was evaluated in society not only by her form, but also by the submission she gave to that shape. So corsets were not only an outfit, but also a symbol of a manners. But everything was an S. That as the 20th century approached, women began to rebel. While women's rights movements were rising, women had to break those metal circles first to own their own bodies. We want to breathe. He realized that they didn't have to die. And in the end, course stopped being just a fashion element, gave way to more flexible, healthy, and free alternatives. But history still whispers to us those tight, steel-wired, silk-covered torture tools every time. It sounds like the crackling of a rib. A woman breathes again every time she remembers, because today women deserve not only to breathe, but also to live in their own body. And every corset has to fight the identity of a woman in the past. He should be remembered as a symbol of the moment he was. Being elegant no longer has to suffer. The woman who glided down the stairs of a cathedral stopped. Her eyes were on the ground, but everyone's was on her hat, stretching from both sides of her head and almost hitting the windows. That strange headdress, which is as high as K, was like the wing of a bird gliding in the air. It was thrown away while the wind was blowing. It was carefully carried between curious glances, but no one was asking if he could breathe, how his neck withstanded the weight, because that hat was just soi was estated. Not S, the name of these hats, which left their mark on the late Middle Ages, especially the late Gothic period, is Hinne. But there were other names for them among the people, such as devil's horns, women's towers, or closeness to the sky. According to some, their elegance, it was a symbol of N. According to some, the indicator that arrogant nobles lost their minds with fashion. The truth is that these hats were not only a fashion, but also a social declaration. Hats would usually be in the shape of a cone, but some of them are both ends. These hats would be designed like an upward horns, starting from 20 centimeters, and can be designed in heights that can go up to almost 1 meter. The veils made of tulle or lace that complete the hat sometimes extend to the floor. Women are almost above their heads. It looked like it was carrying a tower. These flashy titles were worn by women who wanted to show that they belonged to the upper classes of society because the size of the hat, the quality of the fabric, the jewelry decorations used are directly to the social class of that woman. He would give a message about the bigger it was, the richer, the ornate it was, the noble it was. It was an elegant way to say that I'm here and it's not you. But this fashion brought many difficulties with it. His hats are so bulky and high, it was in the way that women should bend down to pass through the door of the house. They should get help from the servants to protect their hats in windy weather. Even in sometimes churches decided that these hats were distracting and tried to ban them. Bans only tied the people for the nobles. Fashion was even superior to the law of God. Not to mention the physical difficulties of the hat. Special collar corsets are used to support the neck. The hair is shaped for hours. Tulle veils are hidden for falling properly. Needle systems were installed. All this trouble was only to be looked at an evening ball for 5 minutes longer. Moreover, these hats activated not only women, but also their reactions against the society's fashion obsession. These titles are for God for the lower classes. It could even mean reading the moment, while some preachers identified these hats with the sin of pride, cursing women wearing such flashy headdresses as an expression of arrogance and ostentation. But just like every age has its own fashion, this is a hike that as the 16th century approached, pennons were replaced by lower-built headdresses, bonnets, and hats. Women now held their heads closer to the ground rather than the sky. But these hats that were left behind in pictures and stories did not surprise us even after centuries. When we look at it today, maybe we are laughing at those high hats. But for the woman of that period, this was not a ridiculous identity. Wearing that title was a way to say this is me without talking. And maybe the only place where a woman can be visible to society is Tone of the Foggy Mornings of England. One of the women looked at the mirror under her eyes, fine wrinkles on her forehead. There were vague spots left by the sun on her cheeks. She did not like her appearance in the mirror. The measure of beauty is a white. He was made to believe that he was a face. He opened the magenta-colored bottle, a slightly metallic-scented liquid with the consistency of milk, dipped his finger and rubbed it on his cheeks. The only thing he felt at that moment was the coldness, but days later it will burn his soul. With his skin, that's that oath. It started in the Victorian period. Women's understanding of beauty was quite different from today. At that time, in order for a woman to be considered beautiful, she had to be pale, not brunette, because paleness, purity, and belonging to the noble class was an indicator of brunetteness. Getting used to it was a trace of poor lives under the sun. So white endings were indispensable for women who wanted to look like aristocrats. And very unnatural methods came into play to ensure this. At the beginning of those methods, cerosity, a chemical mixture, was coming. This mixture was obtained from the combination of substances such as vinegar and lead carbonate. So in fact, women applied lead to their faces. The cerosity was temporarily shiny, smooth, and porcelain-like, but it was the same. It burns the skin from the inside out of the time, clogs the pores, kills skin cells, even causes decay and tooth loss in the chin over time. It is interesting that this lead-based makeup was common not only among lower-class women but also around the royal. It is even said that Queen Elizabeth of Tudor frequently used this substance to keep her skin white and that her skin was almost like a candle over the years. The cracks on the Queen's face were even reflected in the paintings of the painters of the period. But it was society. It still continued to be seen as the pinnacle of elegance, but lead did not stay only in the skin. Leaked under the skin, mixed with the blood, and damaged the nervous system over time. As it continued, women had headaches, visual disorders, shortness of breath, and the problem was not under the influence of this poison. It was in the toxic structure of the perception of beauty. The standard of whiteness that the society assigned to women was so strong that they thought the way to death was to reach beauty. Over time, Gerosis harms science. It was also proven as a flood. But this did not immediately stop its use because beauty was determined by looks, not by knowledge. Women risk their bodies in order to get a share of these looks. They were risking. This whitening craze was not limited to makeup. Some liquids and plant mixtures drunk at that time were also marketed with the claim that they paled the skin. These mixtures contained substances such as opium, arsenic, and mercury. So, their names were poisoning not only their faces but also their internal organs for the sake of beauty. Today, on the shelves of the market where we chose makeup to be beautiful, laboratory disasters were in front of them that day. Beauty is alone for the women of that period. It wasn't something seen in the mirror. That survival was the only way to get married and be accepted in society. So looking beautiful meant living in a way, and that's why they could go so far as to give up even their lives. So, Bub, this story, what do we see when we move to fame? Maybe we don't apply leads to our faces today, but there are digital plugs. Now, filters are obsessed with perfection. A new one that comes out every day. Shining skin trends. Maybe lead doesn't come out of the boxers, but it's still driven into our minds. Human history, he ran after beauty throughout, but sometimes the price of that beauty even suppressed the smell of death. The faces that turned white with lead in the Victorian period tell us something. In fact, elegance can sometimes be poisonous, and every era that accepts the definition of beauty without questioning it. There was a woman in a mirrored castle who took her silver-handled comb and combed her hair in a mirrored castle. She was under layers of powder and perfume dried from white. Her maid came to her. She was about to leave a jug of water and soap when the woman raised her eyebrows slightly. Donto tachi? Do. He said, I will accept guests today. The maid quietly withdrew the water because he knew that there was water in the house. Not soap and rose oil and chalk. And more importantly, being clean didn't always mean being elegant, although it may. Seems strange for today. Cleanliness in Gits is surprising to see that the concepts of speciality have not always gone to hand throughout history, especially in Europe. Being clean in the late Middle Ages and the period from the Renaissance to the Victorian period was often seen as a habit of the lower class with the palace. It was known that the hands and faces were not washed for weeks, while perfumes were flying in the air in noble mansions and ostentatious balls. Water was a suspicious substance for the noble class because, according to the common medical belief of the period, water pores open and diseases it, made it easier to enter the body. So washing was seen as a dangerous activity, especially taking a bath. Moreover, heating water, carrying and preparing was a luxury. It required a servant, so alternative solutions instead of high-class cleaning. Perfume was at the top of these solutions. Lavender rose oil. Intense smells such as musk are frequently applied to the unwashed areas of the body. Clothes were smelled with perfume. Even sentences were placed in the rooms. The smell replaced by cleaning to be elegant. Mek meant to smell good, but it was not to talk about what was hidden under the scent. Powders and makeup products served the same purpose. Body powders, facial powders, and coloring creams were used to cover the top of dirt and hormonal deterioration with the woman. Our lives without washing his faces for weeks. He only added new layers if his hair was combed, but it would not be washed. Special fragrant combs and brushes prepared for them aimed to distribute the oil from the hair, not to remove it. The situation for the servants in the lower class was much different. They were soaking with water because they worked, they were sweating, they were spending time in the outside world, which made it necessary to wash. How ironic it is that those who were seen as dirty in society were cleaner, but those who were called elegant were hidden behind the smells. Zaratha cleanliness with the fete fell so apart even during the periods when the diseases were rampant. The upper class continued to approach the bathroom with a distance. During the plague period, public baths were closed in many parts of Europe, which reduced the people's access to water. But for aristocracy, the excuse for this was ready. This fear spreads water disease, especially among women. In some diaries written at that time, women only live with perfumes and makeup for months without washing their bodies. It is explained in detail that there was a similar contradiction in the sun. The coated dresses worn on top of each other were not washed. The underwear was not changed frequently. Elegant touches were made with laces, scarves, and brooches on the dirty fabrics. This appearance would be an indicator of social status. Your clothes were clean, that it didn't matter, as long as it looked flashy and expensive. But these habits brought health problems with them. Skin diseases, lice, skin irritations, and infectious diseases were common. But despite this, the perception of nobility should not be impaired. These issues were not talked about in public because it had to be admitted that dirt was reconciled for the sake of elegance. Over time, science advanced, microbe theory emerged, especially in the second half of the 19th century. Cleanliness began to gain more importance, but this transformation progressed slowly because it was much more difficult to destroy a perception than to clean a body. Today, when we look back, we see that cleanliness is not only associated with water and soap, but also with a value, and this value changes according to the period. While the dirt was intertwined with the simplicity of the peasantry and the disease, the dirt was intertwined with power, elegance, and status. Perhaps the most striking truth was that society was clearing people with the gaze, not with water, but with water, the only thing that echoed in the dim streets of the town at night. A young girl was low. It was her squeaked. She buried her hand tightly in her mother's palm. She closed her eyes. In a small room, similar to the kitchen behind the house, an old woman warms a thin nay on the fire, then dipped it in a sooty ink. When she pressed on the girl's skin, her mother's lips are covered with nature, because this pain was not just a pain. It was the pain of belonging to a community, of a tradition. That tattoo was not just a shape, it was a part of life. It may be surprising when we look at it with today's aesthetic understanding, but beauty was very closely related to pain. In history.r tattoos, piercings, body piercing, and similar methods are not only for decorating, but also for the identity, the expression of social acceptance, of faith, and sometimes raising a head. But it was painful. Every time beauty was a struggle under the skin. Ancient Masmaler were no stranger to piercing and beating their body. In ancient Egypt, women go crazy. This was considered a symbol of both fertility and closeness to the gods. But this piercing process was far from today's sterile methods. Bone fragments, bronze needles, fish, All of them were used just to look beautiful. Prayers were read to relieve the pain. The environment was smoked with the burned herbs. Sometimes lullabies were sung to girls to get away from the pain. Tattoos are a badge of honor for warriors, an ownership for slaves if the sign was for women. Sometimes it would be a seal stating that they have reached the age of marriage. During the Roman period, even the foreheads of some slaves were tattooed. It is a symbol of humiliation rather than a beauty. But on the other hand, tattoos in the northern tribes are sacred and it was considered an element of charm. The black motifs of Viking women, which extend from the wrists to their necks, made them privileged and untouchable. Every needle stroke added even more value. In the Middle Ages, things changed a little. All kinds of made to the church body. The body created by God considered it an insult. Tattooing and piercing processes were branded as demonic. But among the people, these traditions continued to live underground, especially in nomadic societies. For example, among gypsies, ear, nose, or lip piercing. It was still an indicator of beauty and belonging. Some women even started to carry the name of their husbands or even their clan symbols as tattoos when they got married. During the Victorian period, the pain became a little more bearable with the development of modern medicine. But the ironic side of the shin was that when the pain decreased, the meaning of piercing began to change. Now, these processes have come out of necessity and have become a means of luxury and show. British aristocratic women secretly go to tattoo artists under their shoulders or on their ankles. Essenler used to have it done, but these should have remained hidden because it was still perceived as imminence and downward emulgence in front of the public. Piercings had a special place in the transformation of pain into aesthetics. In some societies, lip piercing means the oath of silence. While it was eliminated, it was interpreted as an increase in sexual attraction in others, and the rings stuck in the nose were the symbol of both beauty and wealth in the geography stretching from India to the Middle East. But it should not be forgotten that these charms passed through the wounds opened with a needle, eye inflammations, and permanent pains. Beauty had a price to be paid for women. This price was often paid silently because the order of be beautiful that the society gave them was shaped at the tip of the needle. Grandmothers wore earrings at a young age to their grandchildren without earrings. They used to say that the girl would be widowed and feed the pain to tradition. Beauty was to resist the pain. It was the proof of being strong both spiritually and physically. But when we look at it from today's eyes, all these procedures seem like pain taken only for the sake of aesthetics. But in fact, it has a much deeper meaning. Beauty with an excessive needle was a reflection of belonging, a culture and a silent resistance. Women became more visible as they became more powerful, as they were beaded. Every trace was a story, and these stories were written with needles for centuries. Behind doors, close to the skin, would spread. Women would hesitate to say some words openly, even when they were talking among themselves. Someone often meant when she said that woman dresses very openly. It was not a low cut or short skirt. It was the appearance of the wrists, because in the past when a woman showed her ankle, it was not only a shame, but also provocative. Wearing a man on a woman's wrist at the corner of his eye would be a big event in society that would crack the back vein. This is a harmless body visible from the end of a lace. Although it seemed to be a part, it actually represented one of the greatest suppressed desires in history, the covered up history of foot. Fetishism was brought under control by constantly breaking down from the Middle Ages to the Victorian period. The arms were covered in the sky. Zlur was pressed with a corset. Hair was hidden with scarves. And then it was time to the feet. The more the woman of society pressed, the more she pressed, the more she pressed. And the feet came top of these pressed areas because as something was forbidden. Her attraction increases exponentially. The Taurian period was one of the eras when these bands reached their most refined but sharpest. Women had to hide their feet under long skirts. Even showing the end of their shoes while walking on the street could be perceived as rudeness. Even at that time, magazines also criticized inappropriate ways of walking. Women took too many steps and advised them not to cause their skirts to open. The ankle turned into an object of imagination for a man because it was invisible, and everything that was not visible grows in imagination. It is doomed to shoes. It has become a part of this fantasy, lace-embroidered, buckle, silk-covered, tight. Shoes were produced not only for beauty but also as a symbol of desire. Some men make it a habit to steal women's shoes. It was tired. It was not just a theft. It was a distorted expression of the suppressed desire. The foot inside the shoe was never fully seen, but it was imagined. So the shoe was an object that both hid and implied in the East, especially in China. This perception is very moved to a more extreme point. With a tradition called the lotus foot, girls' feet were bandaged and broken and reduced from the age of 45. The purpose was not only aesthetic. The little foot meant an obedient woman. A foot curled in pain actually stepped on it. It was also a symbol of a soul, and even this painful deformation was accepted as true of sexual attraction for a while in Western societies because the foot was directly associated with desire. Some moralists were kept secret because it is the mind of the man to show the feet of women. He preached to women that they should tilt their heads forward while walking on the street and pull their wide skirts while walking on the street. Some men should write love letters from society. One wrist, a sock, a shoe with a buckle. All these were seen as aspects that women should be kept under control. The situation was no different even at home. Women do not walk around barefoot. Even next to their spouses, they must wear socks. It was the place because barefoot was equivalent to nudity. Foot baths were special and intimate rituals made only with the help of servants. The woman kept her own feet as a secret that should not even be shown. This is not only the bodies but also the desire. It was the covering of the foot fetishism was born as an indirect result of this pressure, just as everything that was suppressed turned into fantasy. The foot became the symbol of desire in French literature, in English romantic poems. The hidden foot image is always processed in German painting art, and most of all, the wrist that appears in the dance scenes. The rising skirt, which appears for a second while dancing, that 1 second image could represent the entire sexuality of an age. Although today's fantasies about the feet are perceived only as individual preferences, the truth is it is a culture that has evolved as a result of the suppressed aesthetic perception of hundreds of years. Because beauty has not been freely shown throughout history, it has always been presented by covering, and everything that is covered eventually appeared in another way. One morning on the streets of Paris, the lackey hand hanging out of the window of an awakened aristocratic woman drew attention. She carried The small glass bottle she was holding in her hand around her neck, behind her ear, and her chest with an elegant wrist movement. The city was just breathing, but she was already K. He was equipped with arrows. This was not his cleanliness, but his way of showing his social place, because at that time, washing with water would require courage, soap was luxury. Even time was a habit that was looked at with suspicion. Cleaning was measured by suppressing the smell, not by erasing sweat. The Middle Ages. Nothing has changed. From the dark corridors to the flashy mirrors of the Venetians' palaces. Even under the huge hats of the Victorian period, people took refuge behind the smells instead of washing. Cleaning was represented by smell, not visuals. Body soap, aromas such as rose oil, amber musk were poured on it. The more expansive a woman smelled, the more noble she smelled. So the smell of good has become not only hygiene, but also a class identity. Soap is made with especially animal oil and ash. It is known for its bad smell in the periods. It was only seen as a rough material used by lower classes. Cities have little access to clean water. The canals functioned as both lawn and drinking water. Bathing in such an environment is almost an invitation to disease. It seemed to be good that people were masking their sweat, body odors, and skin problems with scents, not water. That's why the perfume industry was born and grew rapidly. Especially cities like Grasse in France became the perfume center of the world. GL Yasmin, Levin orange blossoms were all distilled in small glass bottles and applied to the bodies of queens, dukes, countesses. But this was not just a special luxury for aristocracy. The lower segments of the people began to create their own fragrances. Dried herbs, flower extracts, bulk, the essences mixed with all these processes were like a tool covered on sweat and dirt. There was no cleaning. There was only the art of covering. Perfumes were also seen as a protector against diseases, and sometimes people under their noses dotted holds a handkerchief. They would drip rose oil, cloves, and vinegar into this handkerchief. It was a ritual that was believed to prevent this bad smell from entering and kept the disease away. At that time, the miasma theory was prevailed. Diseases were transmitted by bad odors. That's why desachal smell was seen not only as a social but also as a medical defense, but there was a suppressed fact behind these smells. The more expensive you press the smell that occurs when the human body is not washed for months, the more expensive perfume you press it from under that natural truth. Eklik leaked, especially in crowded balls, theater halls, in church rituals, in environments where hundreds of bodies came together without washing. Even the most beautiful smell would become suffocating. So the choice of smell was almost like a diplomatic strategy. Whose side which essence to sit on, which social message was given. Everything was part of a theater. Women sprinkled flour instead of washing their hair, then sprinkled it with lavender, oil, and odorized it. Men, especially with essential wigs. Powders would sprinkle wigs. Irremovable for weeks. Smells were refreshed for weeks. But water was never worth it, because water meant disease. Soap was rough and poor work. The image of cleaning was the crystal bottle of the perfume. Some women smelled on special occasions. In order to make it effective, the essence is tight to the hidden areas. That is, the back of the knees or the inside of the elbows, because since those areas remain warm, the spread of the smell would be stronger. These small details affect both the personal aesthetic understanding of the woman and the social intelligence. So it would show it. So a smell could be not just in essence a message, an invitation, a mind, the smell of lavender or jasmine that is pleasant to our noses today was a mask at that time. A culture needed with the lack of hygiene of a life far from cleanliness. The smelliet was the illusion, but that illusion was so convincing that even in lives without soap, people could feel elegantly clean and noble. In short, smells in the past, not only to be beautiful, but also to look clean, to protect against disease, and to show class. There was no soap, but there was perfume, and the perfume was trapped only in a bottle. It was not a good smell. It was the way of life of a period. There was a mirror. The huge gold-gilded frame darkened with time. It was the same as a silent witness who judges the minister against time. The same question was hanging on the face of the woman who came across the moment every morning. Should I look thinner, or is it more noble to be a little more fleshy? This question does not belong to a modern woman with the age that occupied the heads of dozens of women from the Middle Ages to the Victorian period. It was an indecision that changed according to Ra, but never disappeared, because the perception of beauty was not only about aesthetics, it was an indicator of a class, a lifestyle, or even a belief. When we look at it with today's eyes, the words nobility and obesity are not much next to each other. It is not mentioned, but history is full of examples rich enough to surprise us. In this regard, especially in the Middle Ages and Baroque periods, obesity was an indicator of wealth and strength. The richness of their tables. The abundance of meat and sweet consumption is a distinction that only the elites can reach. It was warm. Every excess weight in the body. I don't work. I'm not in the field. I'm sitting and eating. Weakness was identified with poverty. Facial features collapsed. Cheeks, narrow shoulders. These are disease and poverty. It was his job. The nobles were chubby because he could eat a lot. Even if he didn't dance, he could make the servants dance. He could stay at the top of the society without moving. S.O. When you look at the paintings of the period, especially the female figures with round lines, full bodies, it was depicted with sleeves and short necks. But things changed over time. After the Renaissance, the aesthetic understanding of Europe began to change, especially with the French fashion. Subtlety and elegance came to the fore. This weakness gradually turned into a symbol of beauty. It was a period when it started, but this weakness was not searched in gyms or diet lists like today. It was seen more as sick romance. Pale, thin wrists, slightly humpy posture. These represented an elegant and fragile woman. Especially this conception became ossified during the Victorian period. But women did not look for healthy ways to lose weight, but ways to make themselves sick for the sake of fashion. They held their breath with corsets. They pressed their ribs inward. Sometimes it will damage their internal organs. They squeezed their bodies as much because the thin waist was now the symbol of the aristocracy. The more thin you are, the more noble you are. The thought prevailed. But the ironic thing is this. For men, this was the opposite situation. They are still ideal for men with broad shoulders, fleshy butts, and strong-looking bodies. Women were looking elegant. Men should have been imposing. That is, even the aesthetic understanding of the period was shaped by gender. The less space a woman took up, the more she is considered, the more space the man took up. The stronger this situation was considered both visual culture and it affected the clothes. While women were walking around with corsets that squeezed their waists with layers of skirts, men showed their existence with wide jackets, puffy pants, and big hats. In some periods, the opposite trend was born. For example, in France, at the end of the 18th century, the giant in the post-Rim period, bourgeois women, who wanted to integrate with the people, turned their weakness into a protest. The plump women of the past were now replacing them with free spirits without a stram. This time, extreme weakness pointed to an intellectual and revolutionary stance. But this didn't last long. The fashion turned back once again and obesity became popular again. Another striking point was the relationship between pregnancy and weight. In ancient times, a woman's appearance of fat was considered a symbol of fertility. In fact, many women were not pregnant. Corsets that enlarged their breasts would try to give this image with pads that showed their hips. Wide because a woman who could give birth was considered valuable in society, so obesity was also presented as a feminine virtue, but no matter what. The only thing that had in common was the body of the religion was constantly wanted to be shaped. Sometimes it had to be thick, sometimes it was thin, sometimes it was dazzling, sometimes it had to be barely visible, but it should have always served a purpose, and what this purpose was, not by fashion magazines, but by those sitting on the board. When we look at it today, this weight perception of the past may seem strange, but the meaning of a body and the conditions of that day is the basis of many beauty standards even today. So the answer to the question is still not clear whether it is obesity or weakness or beauty or health. Maybe the main thing is this. The woman's weight never belonged only to the woman. She stood in front of an old mirror. She was looking at her hands in the silence of the night. Her long fingers were almost bone. She was thin, elegant, but pale. She was bare. The veins were winking under the skin like thin blue roads, while wearing the laced gloves brought by his maid. He asked his reflection in the mirror, "I wonder if I look noble?" This question was once asked thousands of women in the mirror in the morning because nobility was much more than a title, a way of behavior extending to the shape of the body, a posture, an aesthetic rule. Today's hands are limbs that we often don't pay attention to, but in the past centuries, how is the hands of a woman's hands to which class she belonged to? It was a symbol that described that she lived and how valuable she was, especially in the aristocratic classes of the Victorian period and before. Long fingers, a white skin, and thin wrists were like the invisible seal of the female nobility. So why were the hands so important? Hands would give away the daily life of a woman. She worked in the field. Her hands were thick. She cracked. She became darker than the sun. Servants had calluses in their hands. The fingertips of the seams would be rough, but an aristocratic woman would not do any work. It should have been as soft as the pillow. Its fingers should have been long and delicate like the piano button. It would rule with its gaze, not with its hands. So the protection of the hands was done with great care. Special gloves were worn when going out in the sun. Lemon juice, whitening hands, Ichina was used to be used. Hands wrapped in creams at night, wrapped in gauze. Softness dried up until the morning. Women hid their hands in the cape even while walking in the open area so that their hands would not crack in winter. Thin wrists were the finest detail of aesthetics. It was the area that a painter who wanted to see in the daughter of a mother who looked at the man carefully reflected with the most elegant brushstrokes. The thinness of the wrists represented the fragility of femininity. And, of course, the thinner the wrist, the more delicate that woman is. That's why lace bracelets, elegant watch straps, gold bracelets were used to emphasize this elegance of the hands and wrists should be supported by behavior. Women should not put their hands behind their heads. Fingers are never in a hurry. E shouldn't have reached for something. A cup taken with fingertips, a gently turned book page, or a touch to a flower. These would show how a woman was trained, which was part of femininity. How you used your hand would still show who she was. It was not always easy to achieve this ideal look. There were even wooden molds used to stretch the fingers to look with long fingers. The gloves were produced so narrow that the woman had to put her hand in it with difficulty because the tighter the glove, the more the hand was dots. It seemed so small and elegant. It was a torment made just for aesthetics, but it would not welcome a woman's complaint. Elegance should have been combined with silence. This beauty obsession was more universal than thought. Small foot in China, long fingers in Europe, both meant was the expression of the codes. Shaping the body was one of the symbolic ways to control women, and this was one of the ways to make the class distinction more visible. Some women tried to take on this role with their own hands, even though they were not noble. They rubbed their hands with lemon. They tried to soften them with potato peels at night, but if there were black marks between the nails, no matter how beautiful the hands were, it would reveal that the nobility was fake. These aesthetic codes changed over time. Hands after the Industrial Revolution. Now it has become the symbol of work. The strong hands of the woman began to represent her independence. But the elegance of a hand with a thin wrist has never been forgotten throughout history. A young girl who folds a letter or a glass in a woman holding a corner of that hand notebook. The nobleman who lifted it always whispered the same thing in the woman. I am the elite. I am elegant. I rule without appearing. Today, the smile on the face of a happy woman who receives very good comments on social media. Maybe the aesthetic heritage of centuries is a silent. If even the simplest limb of the woman's body has determined its class, value, and femininity, we can still notice that many judgments made through the appearance today are the shadow of those days. The morning light leaking in through the window is still dormant. City. As soon as she woke up, the young girl turned her face in front of the covered mirror as soon as she woke up. She slowly opened the small box in her hand. There was a mixture made of crushed saffron, dried roses, and gold powder. She gently rubbed her face with her fingertips and smiled at the mirror. Her face was shining. But beauty was not just gold. Beauty was not just a visual appreciation at that time. Beauty was a divine balance, a social class indicator, and a ritual that determined the fate of women. Today, finding products such as mascara, foundation, lipstick on cosmetic shelves, it is possible. But in the past centuries, beauty products are mixed with rituals that come directly from nature and often become mysterious mixtures that only the rich can access. These rituals are not only to increase physical beauty, but also it was also applied as a means of spiritual purification or social acceptance. For example, Rubbing applied to the nails was used not only for the eye but also to increase the elegance of the hands. In addition to enlarging the eyes, it would also make the nails look dark and distinct. This was a symbol that showed that person was both fond of care and cultured. In Egypt, in Rome, even in Ottoman palaces, this tradition maintained its existence. Gold powder. Jesus was the most luxurious representative of beauty. It was applied to the face by being rubbed. This would not only shine the skin, but also gave the woman a luminous appearance. This application was so popular during the Renaissance period that some women would not miss the bottom in their daily care routines. But this is also a status show. There was no gold in everyone's house. The woman riding her face with gold was almost shouting that she was noble. Spreading and other substances were used in beauty rituals besides gold powder. Crushed pearl powder in skin whitening, saffron in hiding, dissension bruises, rose oil was used to smooth the skin. But what was remarkable was that these practices were not limited to physical change. These rituals were almost a meditation. While the woman beautied herself, she also turned into her past and her fate. He used to think of his dreams. In some societies, these rituals also had religious meanings. For example, in India, women wrote on their foreheads not only ornaments, but also the expression of the third eye. In ancient Anatolian cultures, brides had their faces and hands on the wedding morning. They drew various motifs. They wished for abundance and happiness with these drawings. So beauty was often a wish, a prayer, a form of protection, of course. Some of these rituals became harmful over time. Lead-containing face powders, arsenic beauty lotion, mercury-blended ointments became out of health for the sake of women to look beautiful. But the patterns that society drew on them were so strict that they often endured this pain silently, because if a woman is not beautiful, she is a good wife, a respectable individual, and a valuable being. White was not seen. This pressure did not only belong to the rich. Even peasant women would improve their own rituals. Mixtures made at home with ingredients such as turmeric, milk, and honey were applied to the skin at night and left until the morning. Hair was combed with rose wall. Teeth are ash. Each class had created its own beauty codes, but there was a detail to be considered. The ritual was shaped not only with materials, but also with intention. Women would not spend these moments of care alone, sometimes with their mothers, sometimes with their sisters. They share this process together. At that time, they tell stories, secrets whisper, they expressed their hopes. Beauty would turn into a moment of purification and solidarity. Beauty rituals are much more accessible today, but women are still the same for themselves in front of the mirror. He asks the question, are I beautiful in this state? Maybe the answer to this question is not hidden in the dust of gold, but in the sincerity of that moment, in the courage to deal with yourself, because in every period of history, beauty has been a narrative, not an illusion, and this narrative is with the hands of women. It was written with patience and hope on a foggy morning, the steps echoing in the stone streets. A 13-year-old girl, the ends of her hair are visible from under the veil she put on her head, a flazing redness. The eyes that watch through the closed windows multiply. Someone is making a sign of the cross. Teenager is purring. Her mother holds her hand tightly, but the girl is aware that something will happen because of her hair. It has happened before, but she only liked her hair to dance with the wind. And people considered this dance a threat. Red hair is just one color throughout history. It was much more than it was a symbol that was both feared and desired, blessed and cursed. Why? Because it was little. It attracts attention, like everything that is rare, but like everything that attracts attention, it also invites danger, especially for women. The Middle Ages. In Europe, red-haired women were associated with witches. A significant part of the witches burned in the records of the European Inquisition were red-haired because this hair color was breaking the memory of society. Dark hair. Women are docile blondes, are considered innocent. The one who stands up was seen as rebellious and even demonic. There were even regions where red hair was believed to be the sign of the devil. Religious leaders described this hair color directly as the sign of the demon in their premise. But there was another side of the matter. In the art world, red hair was often depicted as seductive and fascinating in the Renaissance paintings. In Dante's Divine Comedy, Beatrice's hair was red in the Venuses. Tidy drew red-haired women so often that the term tighty color he was born. So it was possible to be both a witch and a muse at the same time. It was the name of the paradox. Kizalsak took a completely different dimension in England. Queen Elizabeth was red-headed. During her rule, red hair almost turned into a royal symbol, especially nobles. They tried to open their children's hair by washing it with ginger because having that color was no longer just a curse, but also an indicator of strength and prestige. But this did not become widespread among the public because the street sets other rules. The palace is different. Of course, this duality, which was in pursuit of sooty hair, put the heaviest burden on women. The fact that a natural feature with a supernatural meaning caused them to struggle for life with their hair. Some hid their hair. Some of them dyed this hair into a symbol of resistance. Verdi, because he looked at them with his hair. One made them the object of desire. The other put them on the target board with hostility. Even in some areas, it was believed that red-haired babies should be cleaned as soon as they were born. Amulets were attached to them. Holy water was sprinkled in. Some legends? It was said that this hair gave the ability to the owner who shined at night to the moonlight, or gave the ability to cast magic. It was far from reality but effective because people were very prone to demonize what they did not understand. Even when it comes to this historical burden on red hair has not been completely erased. In the media, literature, movies, red characters are still presented with different charismatic, dangerous, or seductive roles. The images that this past has engraved in our subconscious are still rata shows that it stands still. However, hair is just hair, but society turns it into a symbol. Today, red hair is reinterpreted as an indicator of originality and courage. People willingly carry this color to their hair and proudly displays it. But to this point, it is easy to go. There are people who are excluded from false beliefs that have lasted 4 centuries behind it. Unfair punishments, bodies that have been burned. Maybe that's why red hair is still the best form of standing up, because it's not just a pigment. It's a story, and this story is that survival is yourself. It is a quiet but powerful sound of being proud of and difference. While the sounds of the bells on Sunday morning echo from afar, a young woman is trying to carefully draw a black line around the eyes in the tiny mirror in her hand. A little color on her cheeks, a slight PA on her lips, just when Relaclic is going out. Her mother holds her by the arm. "What are you doing?" Did you decorate your eyes? This disrespect for God? The woman bows her head. This sentence spills from her lips while removing her makeup. But I just wanted to feel a little beautiful. The Victoria period and Angpremen Europe, there was a strange tension between the understanding of beauty and piety. A distinct decoration, such as eye makeup, could only be accepted in certain areas and social contexts. But the church was not one of them. On the contrary, a woman who went to the church, it was expected to be as simple as colorless as possible. Almost invisible, because going out in the presence of God was associated with show, arrogance, and even lust. Eye makeup had different meanings throughout history. A protective ritual in ancient Egypt, ancient tit was a status symbol in Rome, but since the Middle Ages, with the influence of Christianity. A great distance has been made to these practices, especially the emphasis on the eyes is seen as trying to attract the attention of others and was considered a sin during this period. Women's eyes circled that it was perceived as a sign of moral laxity that she rubbed her or her eyelashes highlighted. Things were a little more complicated in the Victorian period. Although it seemed like a conservative and religious society from the outside, women working in the lower classes are self. Again, he had made makeup a part of his identity in homes, theaters, or performing arts. But eye makeup was still a bold step because the eye directly seen as the door to his soul and his decoration, meant to blur his intention. If the woman did eye makeup, the question of whom would automatically arise if she was going to church. This would create a much bigger outrage because since the place of worship is considered a place of arms of humility and introversion, physical decoration is almost perceived as mockery. Society would divide the woman into two as soon as she saw it with makeup. It was either light or careless. There seemed to be no third option. In fact, the issue here was not only makeup, it was the woman's desire to have a say in her own body. It was something that made her eyes clear. The woman wanted to appear, but it was dangerous in the social order of this period. The appearance of women could mean disruption of order due to the birth of desire. So even small touches, such as eye makeup, were considered rebellious. The interesting thing is that the noble class women secretly wear eye makeup. They only show it at private balls or closed invitations. This practice, which is both the standard of sin and beauty in the same society, turned into a class distinction if it makes it rich, if it makes it poor, as delicacy as immoral. It was seen that in the church, none of them were acceptable over time. This situation created contradictions in women's own inner world. They wanted to give color to their eyes, but they were afraid of being seen. They wanted to express themselves, but they were taught to be silent because only minute could have been that women should have existed just enough to look at. So what has changed today? Maybe the techniques, colors, and products have improved, but some of those old judgments are still alive. The reason for a woman to do makeup is still questioned. The question of who do you decorate for? Still ask. Howling and a woman without makeup can be declared a show enthusiast if she is a woman with an unkempt makeup, but in fact, eye makeup is a preference. It is an extroverted form of expression. Some are powerful for some. Art is an ordinary routine for some. It is neither a sin nor a necessity. It's just about how a person wants to see yourself, and perhaps the main thing is this. Imagine what a person sees when he looks at himself in the mirror. You are a guest of a great dynasty. You are sitting at an eye-catching table. Candlesticks are on. Music is slowly when The lady of the house smiles, but there is a strange thing. Her teeth are lined up like a pitch-black pearl. She smiles, but you freeze and think about whether this is a disease. But that moment presents itself in its best form because it is inside. Those black teeth are a kind of expression of wealth, the echo of nobility in the smile, according to today's aesthetic understanding. Many things that are defects were seen in the past as an indicator of splendor, beauty, and even morality. Painting the teeth black is one of them. In some periodic cultures of Asia and Europe, white teeth were considered the symbol of poverty, naturalness, and even savagery, whereas black teeth symbolized the loyalty of the married woman to her home, her spouse, and her place in society, while white teeth symbolized the purity and marriage of youth. It was interpreted as a sign of but it was not limited to Japan. This tradition was a controversial area in Europe during the Victorian period. The fact that the teeth are very white in some circles, the province with peasantry, outside life, and rough life. It was implied that the teeth were not shiny, especially for women. It was equivalent to elegance because it would imply that he did not eat often, he did not laugh all the time, and even did not talk much. But black teeth were not only associated with aesthetics, but also with health substances such as iron sulfate contained in the mixture that dyed black, or even beneficial because they prevented tooth decay in some regions. So black smile gained a meaning for both symbolic and practical reasons. So why would people do this? Because the beauty codes of the period were the opposite of our natural beauty obsession today. The natural one was considered raw, not artificiality, but the expression of care and status. Someone who painted his teeth black was giving the message, I have money and knowledge for this process. At the same time, these people had a respected position in society, and this differentiation gave them visibility. Of course, not everyone liked this practice. Over time, this habit was underestimated, especially in the regions where the Western influence increased. The modernization wave of the white tooth is clean, with its becoming a symbol of development and development. Black smiles turned into a reason for shame, but still, this did not reduce the value of the intention in the past. Like every tradition, this gained meaning with the norms of his own period. It is probably found contrary or ugly to the smile aesthetic. However, if the same person had lived years ago, it could have been accepted among the nobles because aesthetics is not as universal as we think. It constantly changes with the influence of society and even beliefs of the time, no matter how precious the teeth were. The more envious jet black teeth were at another time. Think about it. There was an obsession, like today's white tooth obsession, but it was in the opposite direction, and people were willing to use special mixtures for pain for days. Moreover, that rose behind us, there were not only beauty, but also deep social meanings such as belonging, marriage, maturity, and wealth. Maybe that's why things that seem strange when we look at the past were actually quite meaningful for the people of the period. And these details that fall to us in the judgment. And first, try to understand, because every smile is shaped in time and every color tells a story. Imagine a tired man who worked all day and returns home. There is a letter waiting for him at home. He is invited to take part in the most respected ball of the period that night. He will be dressed, looks in the mirror, he straightens his tie, wipes his jacket, combs his hair back, but the appearance of his wife, which attracts his real attention, looks like a statue with a thin waist, puffy skirt extending to her back. The woman smiles in front of her, but she can't breathe. It's not beauty, it's a difficulty. Their breathing will be heard during that night, not their speech, because that night the visual feast of a body built with clothes will be offered. The Victorian period was one of the eras when beauty was created from illusion, not from naturalness. Today, what asthmatic surgeons did was done by the tailors and fashion designers of that day by tying fabric and sewing. The bodies were shaped not to reflect the truth, but to follow the aesthetic codes of that period. Every woman should have been elegant, but this elegance has none. Time did not come with a natural body shape. Corsets were the most well-known tools. These clothes, which stood like bones between the fabric supported with iron bales, narrowed women's waists to 40 centimeters. This was not just a matter of appearance. Women with these clothes, sometimes they couldn't eat, he couldn't walk comfortably, sometimes they were stuck enough to faint. The question of why women always fell and fainted, even in medical books for a while, it was in real clothes. But this wasn't just valid for women. Men are also fake. They were building their socialite identity with shoulder fillings, canes, and perfumes. At that time, a gentleman was measured by the importance he gave to his appearance if his hat was crooked, if his pants were not ironed, or if his collar was dirty. He could be accused of not only aesthetic, but also a moral decline. Women wore a few layers of underwear under the puffy skirts. They sewed special clothes to make their buttocks look narrower. It was impossible to sit with some clothes because when you sat down, your skirt fell over it sank into your ribs. No one was interested in this. The important thing was to look like that. This lie is aesthetic. Another interesting aspect of the soul was that it clarified the class distinction created by the entrance were one to distinguish the rich from the poor. At first glance, the peasant woman's waist. Thick, hence the waist of the century-old urban woman's waist should have looked like a violin bow. The difference should have been drawn not only with income, but also with the body. The bodies created with clothes became so common that people became alienated from naked bodies. The real body was only in the bathroom, or it could be seen in front of the doctor. In fact, some men were shocked when they saw their wives when they undressed for the first time at night, because the aesthetic illusion was so strong that women almost turned into an architectural work. It is not natural to say beautiful body during this period. It meant a compressed, pressed, raised, hidden body. Maybe your chest was small, but it could be shown big with a dress. Maybe your hips were straight, but it could be embossed thanks to the filling. Maybe your stomach was dislocated, but it could be made straight with a corset. And all this was the last what emerged in flower was a beauty standard that no one really had. But this illusion had a price: shortness of breath, compression of internal organs, digestive problems, spinal corsets have become popular again as an aesthetic product today. Maybe, but in historical terms, they were the symbol of pain drawn for the sake of beauty. And in the age of this lie, people hid not only their bodies, but also their selves, because everyone's identity was measured by the length of their skirt, the thinness of their waist, and the angle of their hat. The real under the image was insignificant today. Maybe we are not different. We do ourselves beautiful with filters, applications, makeup, but we should not forget that this loop is not new. Only the tools have changed. Anyway, the course of that period is also today's Photoshop, and maybe why understanding the bodies created with the clothes of the past allows us to see today's aesthetic prints more clearly. One morning, the end of a young girl walking on the rainy streets of London. The skirt stained with mud, the air is gray, the wind cuts her face, but her face there is a strange vitality, a dark pink with crimson cheeks and lips close to purple. A man passing by raises his head and looks at her. Then another girl smiles, but this smile is not sincere. Those colorful cheeks are not a healthy skin content, Bino. One knows that the product of a chemical mixture that she applied without. That girl is slowly poisoned every day for her beauty. Looking healthy in the Victorian period, it was a sign that you came from a good family, that you were fed clean, that you were close to nobility. Pale. The UK disease was considered colorfulness, vitality. But the interesting thing is that this vitality is often not real. It was artificial. If there was no natural blush, what would be done? Of course, makeup. But this makeup was not as innocent as today's foundation, a compound containing mercury to give vivid color to the cheeks. Lead-based pigments were used, insect extracts, arsenic lipsticks, and sometimes even pieces of fabric kept in wine were applied to the lips so that the lips would appear more well. Women turned into a chemistry laboratory for their beauty, but without a chemist. The most popular mixture applied to the Clara was lipstick of French origin. This word directly meant red, sometimes iron oxide. Sometimes there was a cinnabar mercury compound. Although these substances provide a pleasant redness in the short term, it irritates the skin in the long run. It would leave spillage and even permanent damage. How ironic, isn't it? When you wanted to look healthy, poison was actually processed under the skin. The dyes applied to the lips were not innocent either. Cosmetic manufacturers purple mustard extract to obtain darker and more permanent colors. They used to use lead, acetate, and arsenic mixtures. Some women mixed with beeswax and animal oil to make their lips look brighter. Even if these mixtures melted and dripped during the day, it would not be a problem because the appearance was too much to be compared with health. It was important that makeup was not only beauty but also a status indicator. A pale face resembled a maid working at home. If it was a dark-lipped woman with red cheeks, it was a remarkable public woman who welcomed the guests who danced at balls. It wasn't a tick. It was a social card. Some women exaggerate their blush. They used to apply beetroot or raspberry juice directly to their faces. Although this seems natural, it would cause irritation when left on the skin for a long time. Still, this bitter beauty is an accepted bed at that time. It was because everything was to look alive. It didn't matter what you were going through. The color on your face suppressed the truth. It's interesting. Some women used to make a physical effort to raise their own blood pressure. Go up the stairs and walk fast and slap them in the face. So that they tried to get natural redness because they wanted to look genuine. Even this genuineness was the result of a fake effort. Over time, these chemical makeups began to threaten the health of women, spots that did not go away on their skin. Nervous system disorders. There were headaches and even but the problem was not in a beauty product, but in a social expectation, because at that time, women were given the task of looking beautiful, not beauty, for men at any cost. Red cheeks are often drunkenness. It was a sign of So the makeup belonged only to women. The man was natural. The woman had to be processed, which was another dimension of the cultural pressure applied to women's bodies. because even the presence of women had to pass the aesthetic test today. Red cheeks and purple lips can still remind us of vitality, but there was another story behind these colors in the past: skin stained with lead bodies, damaged by arsenic, nerves depleted with mercury. So now let's go back and ask ourselves, beautiful? Was it really to be healthy or to think of unhealthy things as beauty? Maybe the real disease was to normalize self-poisoning for the sake of appearance. A young woman in her 20s, Eleanor, wakes up every morning and combs her hair and faces with her hands. He is looking for his fame. There is neither a mirror in his room nor a clean water container where he can look at his reflection. He can't see his face. He just feels that something is missing from his mother's lip bending, from the whispers of the neighboring women, from the men who miss their eyes in the market because in Victoria, London, beauty was measured by language, not by eyes. There was no mirror, but there were many comments. In today's world, the subject of beauty is often mirrors. The person takes care of himself. But in the Victorian period, most of the women did not have to work in the mirror. Someone from the lower class was a luxury to have a mirror. Those who had money would keep the mirrors in the house covered because looking at the mirror too much was considered arrogant. So a woman's ability to feel beautiful was shaped by what others said to her. Beauty as 8 was judgment. It was a label embroidered on a woman's mind from someone else's lips. The understanding of beauty of the society was one type: white, small, thin waist, low tone of voice. But these ideals were cruel to those who were not born thousands of women like Eleanor. He evaluated himself with the comments of his jokes. Your cheeks, chubby hair, very dark, eyebrows, thick beauty was shaped with criticism. He did not show a mirror, but everyone was saying that he would say, beauty is not a need for men. It was a detail for women. It was a condition to exist. When Eleanor went to the market, she not only chose fruit, but also weighed whether she was beautiful in the eyes of a grocery store trying to look at her and fix her mustache. When a flower woman said, "Daughter, I wish you would apply some blush." When Eleanor Scanita was stuck in the Elbine because beauty was synonymous with respect. The more beautiful would rest less and be judged. Women withdrew into themselves. Over time, they started to imagine their own images because they were not the same. These dreams with the comments they had. It would take shape a woman. No matter how sweet your looks you had, she would think that her eyes were beautiful. But the next day, if someone said your nose was a little big, that beauty belief would start to crack. So women built their own images from other people's sentences. She was fragile and far from reality. Over time, the beauty began to take shape with more comparisons. When Eleanor went to her cousin's wedding, she looked at other women and counted her own shortcomings. Her dress is brighter, her hair is smoother, her smile is more elegant. The feature was now broken not only by interpretation but also by comparison. Every woman was afraid of being missing next to someone else because society turned the beauty into a race. Being dependent on comments instead of mirrors destroyed self. Women were their own values. They adjusted it according to the sounds. Someone who could look in the mirror and say, "I'm beautiful today," wouldn't even dare to think about it at that time because conceit was a sin. Silent acceptance was a virtue. Even if Eleanor found herself beautiful one day, she couldn't share it with anyone because the mirror there wasn't. But there was judgment. There were comments, and these comments would not allow a woman to be honest, even in herself. The most painful definition of beauty is determined by men. It was applied by women. Women evaluate each other according to their male point of view. What the suffixes said was becoming the norm. So millions of women like Eleanor were never actually beautiful to themselves. They always tried for someone else's liking in the end. Eleanor, one day, a mere fit into their mirrorless years. But she looked in the mirror. He saw the sentences he heard, not himself. His mother's dissatisfied look, the indifference of the grocery grocer, the neighbor's jealous interpretation. The mirror was not just a glass. It was a curtain where all the words of the past were gathered. Eleanor, not his own face, but the face that society gave him. He saw it, and if you have come this far, you must have noticed that beauty does not always start in the mirror. Sometimes people's language, their gaze and silence turn into the strongest mirror. But when those mirrors are broken, what is left behind is sleep. And the past tonight in the History Channel, we traveled to the most secret corners. If you liked this narration, you can support us by using the thank you button at the bottom of the video. You can share the interesting beauty rituals you know about the past in the comments again in news stories. See you soon. Close your eyes. We will continue to explain.
Yeah.